All right, welcome back to the Zach Clark Show. We are here today. So just a little backdrop on how we got Dr. Bernstein here. I've worked in behavioral healthcare for 13 years. About a month ago, one of his colleagues, he was in the city, texted and said, can we stop by the office here at Release Recovery? Our kind of business development person said, sure. I happened to have a window. I stopped in and Dr. Bernstein was there. And it is very rare these days to walk out of a meeting and have the content of that meeting stick with me. But in this case, it did, because the meeting ended up being an hour talking about how food and what we put in our bodies affects our mental health, which Dr. Bernstein is an expert on. He's the CEO and founder of Accord, which is a fascinating kind of pioneering residential program up in Massachusetts centered around metabolic psychiatry. And so, one, welcome to the show. And two, tell people what metabolic psychiatry even is, because that's going to, be a jumping off point for us.
Sure. Well, first, thanks for having me. It's great to be here in person with you. And call me Matt also. I'm really informal. So
cool.
Yeah.
Matt. Easy.
Metabolic psychiatry is this idea that our metabolic health in our bodies, in every one of our cells, affects our brain health and our mental health. And that we are in the midst of a metabolic epidemic in our country, and a mental health problem, acute problem. It's been going on and building for decades, but it's accelerating. The graph is getting steeper and steeper in the wrong direction. And these things affect each other profoundly. And we can intervene with metabolic treatments to improve brain health and mental health, which is the really exciting part. That's what gets me super jazzed.
For the person that is sitting there listening, like the word metabolic, can you just break that down for people? Yeah.
So metabolism is the idea of every nutrient that we take in, mostly food we're talking about, but there are other nutrients. Things like light are a nutrient as well. All these nutrients are used by our cells to make energy. In the cells, energy is made in the form of this stuff called ATP. It's like, the US dollar essentially. It can be used for anything.
Right.
And so it's making energy and making building blocks, things like neurotransmitters or cell membranes or whatever that cell does. It's powered by metabolism. So it's all of these chemical reactions turning nutrients into energy and building blocks. So it's really like fundamental to the health and life of a cell, essentially.
It's fascinating.
How new is this connection of what you put in your body can affect your mental health?
Well, in some ways it's very old. And then in terms of really applying it in mental health and psychiatry, more new. But it goes back really to the time of Hippocrates, 5th century BC. They were using fasting to treat seizures. They knew that if someone was having seizures all the time or nonstop, they could have them stop eating, and within a couple of days, their seizures would stop. And they could keep them fasted for some period of time, and their seizures would be better for a while. Now, the problem with that is you need to eat to live, so you can't maintain fasting for too long. It's not a good health strategy. But basically, when someone fasts, they make ketones. That's our body's adaptation to not having food. Evolutionarily, when we were, millions of years ago, when there was food scarce environments, that's how we evolved. We needed to be able to hunt and cooperate with each other, to work together, even if we hadn't eaten in days. And ketones are what powers our brains when there's no food around. And they're really good for our brains. They're a signal to our brain to do lots of good things, essentially. So then way back in 1921 at the Mayo Clinic, there was this very clever doctor who said, we need to make a diet that sort of mimics what fasting does. Can we do that? And he came up with this diet called the ketogenic diet. So people think keto and they think, oh, it's all about losing weight and there's a million things on the internet. It's a medical diet that was invented in 1921 at the Mayo Clinic to treat a brain health disorder, epilepsy, in kids. And it was incredibly effective. So it took off, literally lots of papers. This was the main treatment for pediatric epilepsy. There's now been 12 randomized controlled trials showing that ketogenic diets work in child and adult epilepsy. And it not only works, it works when the medications don't work.
Is it still being used? I mean,
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
So why? So that's like that is the cornerstone of why the conversation we had a month ago in the conference room next to where we're sitting stayed with me, and why I'm proud to call you a colleague. And I understand the value of medications. I understand that medications play a role in healthcare. You know, when I was getting sober, I went on medication. You know, so I get that. I've heard of only medications to treat epilepsy. I've heard of only medications to treat seizures. I have never heard before talking to you that the idea of a keto diet might be the most effective or one of the most effective ways to treat. So,
well, it blew my mind too when I first heard about it. And
But
I
for
didn't
you as
hear
a-
about it in medical school.
When did you
either.
first hear about it?
About 6 or 7 years ago.
Wow.
I was sitting in a lecture hall at McLean Hospital and listening to a grand rounds from Dr. Chris Palmer, who's really, one of the world experts in ketogenic diets for mental health. And he was talking about not only this data in epilepsy, but he was talking about using it in drug-resistant psychotic disorders and bipolar disorder. And I was blown away. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. But the story and the argument and the data was so compelling. And I just needed to learn more about it.
So Matt, but like at that moment in time, right? This is 6 or 7 years ago before you've went on this journey, and Chris Palmer's there talking about this. Do you have a conscious thought that like, hey, if I'm going to go down this road, I might be going against traditional psychiatry today as we know it, and how that might affect your relationship with your peers, how that might affect your career, like that's a very interesting moment.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I think, there's a lot of backstory about why that didn't bother me. I mean, number one, I've always been a bit rebellious and
I love it.
Don't care about what the powers that be think on some level. So, I mean, that dates back to when I was, a teenager. I was the one breaking all the rules. So,
Amazing.
I have that in my personality. But not in medicine. Medicine's a little different. So, when you do medical training, it's very hierarchical. It's very by the book. And there is a lot of, sort of shaming that goes on if you're not following the rules. And you can get in trouble, for sure, in the medical world. In many ways, you can, lose your reputation. And, I spent a lot of years working on my reputation as a doctor. So I definitely cared about that. But at the time, I was pretty disillusioned with what regular medicine could do because I had my own personal story with 2 of my 3 kids who had gotten sick, and the regular medical treatments. And we were getting the best. I mean, because the kids really had what looked like a neuropsychiatric problem, which turns out to have been much deeper than that and really physical.
Can we go there?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So you have 3 kids.
Yeah.
I want to talk about the 2 that this kind of and then the 3rd, because I always, in substance abuse and mental health, there's always the other kids.
Yes.
And I want to talk about how you were able to support him or her while the other 2 were kind of struggling as well, because they're oftentimes forgotten.
Yeah. So the story is, we're living outside of Boston. I'm a psychiatrist working in all these, nice settings.
And your wife's a psychologist, right?
My wife's a psychologist. Kids are doing great. We're living this nice life in the suburbs. They're going to school and doing well and doing sports and friends and
How old?
Music. So we have twins who are 14 at the time and another one who was 12 at the time, all boys.
Wow.
And so the 12-year-old and one of the twins, literally overnight, everything fell apart. And it was not a little bit. It was not subtle. It was dramatic. I mean, they went from happy, well-adjusted kids to literally not being able to go to school, not being able to read a book, not being able to spend time with friends, wanting to die. We were contemplating, hospitalizations, lots of treatment. I mean, we were well-resourced and connected. I got the best psychiatrists and consultants and medical doctors. No one could help them.
So overnight, they experienced a significant mood altering. Across the board.
Mood. Yeah. I mean, depression, really bad intrusive OCD, cognitive problems, could not think, like they couldn't read, they couldn't focus enough to read.
Wow.
intrusive, thoughts about not wanting to be around anymore. I mean, it was just like as bad as it can get, as bad as you can imagine. Literally, within weeks, we went from happy, well-adjusted to, it's like a bomb went off in our lives, literally within
And
weeks.
it becomes a full-time job, right? I mean,
Wow.
It was, my wife had to, significantly reduce her work. She was working extremely part-time, and I was essentially working 2 jobs because I was, I needed to keep working to pay the bills. And then my entire second job was researching, trying to figure out what was going on, how can we help them, what are the potential routes we can go down. Every new treatment that someone was proposing, I was trying to research and figure out, and then doing my own research to try to figure out what is this and how can we help them.
What did you think it was? Like, what were the steps you took to try to figure it out?
Well, at first it looked so psychiatric, and that's, what we were thinking it was. It looked like, severe OCD, rapid onset OCD, and depression. And that's the road we were going down. So, those types of medication treatments and psychotherapies, they couldn't do psychotherapy. I mean, like the traditional psychotherapy for OCD would be CBT, this version called exposure response prevention therapy. They literally couldn't even sit in the room with the CBT therapist trying to tell them, how to do these various things. It was, just untouchable by these treatments. The medications were not helpful and often making them worse.
so the needle was not being moved.
It was getting worse. I mean, yeah.
Is there any reason why? I mean, like one kid, but like both at the same time. Is there any Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so
Genetic?
it made us concerned that there was something environmental going on. That was a clue that this wasn't. We even went down the road. Like, did we do something as parents?
Or was there some traumatic?
Did we?
Yeah.
Were we doing something wrong? We went to a couples therapist ourselves, just tell the story and say,
Really?
Is it possible that we're doing something here that caused this? And, after a couple sessions, he was just like, no, this is not, there's something going on biologically. Like, you guys got to figure it out. You guys are fine. There's nothing wrong with you two. Get to work and figure out what's going on. And I credit my wife, who was, before me, realized this is not psychiatric, not solely psychiatric. She was the one who said, we need to look at other things. There's something medical going on. There's something environmental going on. There is this diagnosis called PANDAS, and it's now called PANS. Essentially, it's acute onset autoimmune encephalitis. The immune system is attacking the brain, usually due to an infection. The classic one is a strep infection, but it can be other infections, Lyme and co-infections. It can be toxin mediated as well. Things like mold toxins can set it off, and other environmental toxins, or some soup of infections and toxins, and an immune system that just sort of gets overloaded and can't handle it, eventually malfunctions and starts attacking parts of the brain.
Is this a common?
It's not that common, although there are research groups that are looking into this and doing a lot in publishing about it. There's a research group at Stanford that does a lot of clinical work and research work about it. So it's known, and there are certainly families out there who know that this fits. And it's any really acute onset neuropsychiatric syndrome, especially if it occurs after an infection or seems to get worse after an infection or some exposure.
But what's the cocktail? Because I know I have 2 kids. They're sick all the time.
Yeah.
Strep was running through our house.
Right.
My wife got it twice. I got it once. My son. It's not necessarily that anytime someone gets a virus or a bacterial infection, this could trigger the autoimmune system. There is something genetic mixing together that your sons, because it's crazy that the other twin didn't have that.
Yes. There is clearly genetic predisposition for this. There's certain families where it seems to happen more than others. Now, it's hard to tease out genetics from environment because, we share some of the same genetics in our family, just like any family.
Yeah.
Or most families that, are biological. But we also share the same environment.
Yeah.
Right? So which is it? We lived in a very old house when the kids were young.
Okay.
In New England colonial from 1817.
Love it.
Where there was literally like, a basement that was, had been flooded who knows how many times, because we lived near there was like a creek running through the backyard. And at one point towards the end of us living there, it completely flooded. So we realized, all right, well, we had moved out of that house by then, but that basement must have flooded how many millions of times over the 200 years or whatever that it had been around.
You're thinking mold.
Lots of mold down there for sure. We ended up getting the house we were living in at the time tested, and it had mold as well. Toxins in the food, toxins in the air, there's just so many things that we get exposed to these days. And, you combine enough of that with the wrong infection, the wrong genetics, and this can happen. It's not, thankfully not super common, but I started to wonder how many of the people in my practice as a professional actually have some version of an autoimmune encephalitis or some other medically caused neuropsychiatric syndrome. And, this idea that we've ruled that out, now it's just a psychiatric diagnosis, really is kind of absurd. I can talk about that all day, but, we just sort of say you get a couple of lab work and say, okay, you're medically fine. Now it's just something in your brain, but we've never really known what those root causes of what these, mental health conditions are. What is depression? What is schizophrenia? What is bipolar? The brain is connected to the body, right?
What's coming up for me is like, and you're a doctor.
Yeah.
I was at an event 2 weeks ago, and one of the honorees got up there, and I know her well, Jennifer Bandier. She ran a successful kind of women's clothing line here in New York City, and she's been MIA. She's been sick for several years, and she basically said that she was diagnosed with long COVID, and it ended up being MS.
Right.
And like how many, like as a doctor, it's like this, you got to listen to your patients.
Right.
Like your kids were not getting better. So,
right.
Had you not been a doctor, you kind of just like kept, when did the shift come where you were like, okay, or what was the breakthrough moment, I guess?
Yeah, well, I'll answer that, but I'm glad you brought up long COVID, because that's a way people can really understand, because a lot of people have long COVID or know someone that has long COVID, and it's very similar. It's this idea that you've had an infection and now you've got these long-term consequences. Your body's not working right. Your brain's not working right. Some people are completely debilitated and have never gotten back to work from long COVID, right? So it's very similar to what, is happening in PANS for kids. It's just maybe a little bit, different infections, but very, very similar. So, people I think can understand this a little more if they think about long COVID. And I think it's in some ways, going to bring some more attention and research towards this idea that, anything, infectious can then present as a brain health problem or a whole, systemic problem that can last a very long time.
I'm just saying this out loud now so that we can go back to it, because what has been coming up on this show is this idea of it's not misdiagnosing, but it's diagnosing without thorough evaluation and investigation of what the full picture is of the patient.
Right.
So with kids and ADHD, not really understanding, like maybe there's something else going on. And you just said, we don't really know the root or what is depression or bipolar disorder or borderline personality disorder. And so my question really is, here we are diagnosing and prescribing drugs without fully knowing perhaps what is the cause.
That's right.
So how does that become such a normal transaction in the field? Is that the pharmaceutical industry being like, oh, we're doing our trials here, and we know we got our doctors who are, in our pockets saying, go ahead. I see you want.
Yeah. I think it's a great question. How did it become this way? And it's tough because, we don't know the root causes of all these things. I can't even tell you the root cause of my kid's illness with 100% certainty either. We did all these investigations, tons of tests, and we got some causes. We knew this was positive and this was positive and this was positive. And we did a bunch of things to help them. But do we really know exactly what was going on? So the human body is incredibly complicated and mysterious. Meanwhile, there are people suffering with these conditions, whether we, looks like depression and we call it depression, or it looks like OCD, or it looks like schizophrenia, or it's addiction, and we have to do something to try to help them. And the medications can help. So it's not to say that we need to, abandon treatment. And so that's the challenge that we're in, is it's very hard to figure out what is the root cause, and yet we have to try to do things to try to help people. But I think it's important for all of us in the medical field to have humility that we don't really know what's causing this, and we don't really know what's going to help, and that we should be open-minded about the causes and the treatments that might help someone. And we should really listen to the individual who's coming to us and the families who know this person really well, especially if it's a kid, because we don't know everything, especially in the mental health world. I mean, in medicine, that's true as well, but in psychiatry and mental health, we really don't know what's causing these things.
So
sorry to be a downer.
No, I mean,
that's
honesty.
honest. Yeah, that's honest. I mean, I my fear is that we just all get into this machine of healthcare, and we just churn and burn. And to a certain degree, the thing that I've been thinking about a lot about in my career is like, what does insurance get you? What does all the money in the world get you? What like doesn't everyone deserve this care and compassion that you're approaching the world with around some of these things? And what got you to this point is the fact that you had 2 kids that rocked your world for an extended period of time. And so I'll go back to my other question, like, what was the breakthrough? What was the moment where you found out this connection between their health and the way that they were fueling themselves? So, or did that happen? I don't know
that there's a specific moment. I mean, so we were already down the road of alternative ways of looking at this by the time I heard that lecture about ketogenic diets. We were already working with functional medicine doctors and environmental medicine doctors and hearing what they had to say and offer. And that world is a whole other world into itself, in that, there's people trying to look at root causes of things, and they often can find root causes, and I think we did with our kids in many ways. But there's also million blind alleys that you can go down, and hundreds of thousands of dollars that you can spend on out-of-pocket testing and treatments and consultations, and most people can't do that. That's
right.
No.
We were privileged to be able to have the resources, both time and money, to be able to devote to finding all of this. And we found, mold toxins, we found Lyme and other co-infections. They definitely had very high strep titers, both of them, meaning that they had been exposed to strep many times. And for a lot of people, that is indicative of that strep was a cause. And then we ended up doing all kinds of alternative treatments. I mean, lots of intravenous antibiotics and supplements and other alternative treatments like hyperbaric oxygen and all kinds of things to try to get them better. And that's when we made the most progress, when we were doing the most aggressive, full, complete version of all of those things at the same time.
2 things that are coming up. One is how you are a doctor, your wife as well, or she's a psychologist.
Yes. Yeah.
You have access, you have knowledge. How the hell is someone out there who is just a normal person with a family on a day-to-day, how can they figure this out? How can they be helped? And secondly is, I have 2 young kids. My in-laws have a house upstate. The whole house, built in 1800, lead everywhere.
Right.
Lead everywhere, right? My son he was speech delayed. Exposure to lead could be, we've had his levels checked. We're in the country, ticks everywhere, Lyme disease.
Are you anxious?
This is a thing.
Are you running home and you're gonna go?
No, I do that. My wife has to check me because I don't want to make my kids not want to go outside and play.
Right.
But at the same time, you hear horror stories and it's there.
Jay is like the black cloud, just like he is convinced that. Yet he will smoke a cigarette and do the nicotine. He's a very mysterious figure in the way that he'll wash his hands 1,000 times a day.
That's true. You're right. You're 100% right. There are things I care about and then other things I don't care about. But for me, I guess the question really is how do you walk the line of being careful and cautious without, strangling your kids and their freedom.
Yeah, I think just as you said, you're walking a line. I mean, I think, you need to have some concern about certain things. I think, things we know are a big deal. Like you mentioned, lead, we know is a big deal. We know a tick bite is a big deal. And so if there is a tick, I live in New England. I've gotten bit by ticks. I have a dog. I love going in the woods. I haven't stopped doing that, even though this all happened. But when I get a tick bite, I send the tick off and get it tested to make sure it doesn't have various things in it. And, I will take antibiotics if it does. And so there are, various ways you can be cautious and still live your life, which is, you have to be able to live your life. It's so good for us to be out in the woods, right?
Yeah.
So you don't want to give that up. Right.
Are you more of like, this is what we need to do, and your wife is like, let's talk about what we need to do?
No. She's pretty. She knows what we need to do, maybe more than I do. Yeah.
So you go through this, and we'll get back maybe in a little bit to how your kids are doing today, because we'll want the update. But you have this experience, this personal experience, which is how life a lot of times works. Then you hear this guy, Chris Palmer, who is really an expert in metabolic psychiatry, right? And that starts kind of, making your mind go a little bit. Tell me about like the next, from that 6 years ago to today, where you have this treatment program,
right?
This world, like extremely innovative. Our team was just up there a couple weeks ago touring, doing the open house. You're treating patients, based on the knowledge that you've gathered over the past 6 or 7 years since that talk. So can you take us through your findings, the science behind it?
Yeah.
I mean, this is, for me, when you talk about schizophrenia, bipolar, borderline personality disorder, mental health in general, and then, how that interacts with this keto diet, because I also have questions. I'm an athlete, and one of the things that's really gotten hot in the last couple of years is this idea that you take a ketone shot before you work out.
Right.
And I don't know if it's real or fancied, or is that going to help mental health? So I want to hear, so we can kind of educate the listener on that, because I think people are going to be fascinated by your findings.
Yeah. So at the time, we were in the midst of all this functional medicine stuff, as I said, hearing about the ketogenic diet for these severe, mental health disorders. I did not say we have to put the kids on a ketogenic diet. We were already down a bunch of roads with various diets: gluten-free, dairy-free, whole foods, toxin-free. It felt like enough with food at the time. And the kids were already really complaining about their restrictive diet. Like the one thing they had was like food, and we took that away from them in terms of like pleasurable food. So that would have been a tough sell at the time. So I put myself on a ketogenic diet at the time, felt amazing. And then I was thinking to myself, well, I'm already making, 2 dinners sometimes to try to get them to eat healthy food. I can't be making myself yet another dinner. So, I just put it on the shelf for a little while. We kept going with our kids, like we were saying, full-time job for my wife, sort of second job for myself. Made a lot of progress with them. And then, once we were making enough progress with them, I started thinking to myself, this is always in the back of my mind. Like, I need to go back to this ketogenic diet for mental health thing. So I started learning all about the biology of it, the mechanisms by which it works, how powerful is it, how can this really work. I was also studying longevity at the time for myself, because I was sort of, I think, having a midlife crisis. And, the way I dealt with that was like to try to understand how to be healthy for a longer period of time.
Yeah.
And so the biology.
The world is actually, by the way, you're not alone. I mean, the whole world, if you go, I mean, social
longevity
media
is becoming a huge topic.
My whole feed. And I think we could probably spend an hour talking about the sauna, the cold plunge, the diet, the sleep, the circadian rhythm, which I know, like all of this.
Yeah, which we try to incorporate, by the way, in this metabolic treatment, because what I learned is that the way the ketogenic diet works is so overlapping with all of these other things that I was learning about longevity. The biology is all the same biology. Ketones are our survival mechanism, essentially. This is how we survived when there was not enough food. They're triggering the same types of things in cells that you trigger when you exercise or when you do a sauna or a cold plunge. These things that make us stronger, essentially, that make our cells work better. But you can get that signal 3 times a day, or really all day, if you get your ketones up, from a certain way of eating.
Can you just explain those real quick, two things? And I know you did, but again, like essentially in a basic way, what is a ketone? And then what is the ketogenic diet?
Yeah, great. I'm glad you asked that. Yeah, so just real basically, the ketogenic diet is a diet that's high in fat, moderate protein. That's where people sometimes get tripped up. They think it's a high protein diet. It's not. If you eat too high protein, you won't make ketones. So it has to be moderate protein, enough that you can still build muscle. That's very important. So not as low as what the USDA says of 0.8 grams per kilogram, but more like 1 or 1.2 grams per kilogram. I think ideal for a ketogenic diet and someone who's trying to build muscle, which I think is incredibly important. And then very, very low in carbohydrate. So no simple sugars, no processed flours, no grains, not even things like, beans and legumes on a strict ketogenic diet, because you need to convince the cells that to make these ketones. And the way you do that is to keep insulin extremely low. So insulin's the hormone that we make when we eat carbohydrates. And to some extent, we make some insulin when we eat a lot of protein. That's why we can't eat too much protein on the ketogenic diet. So if we eat in such a way that our insulin stays really low all the time, then our liver will produce ketones, which are essentially, we start burning fat for fuel instead of carbohydrates when we start eating this way. Fat becomes our fuel for our cells. And the liver will see these fats coming in and will chop them up into these little pieces, essentially, that are called ketones, these little small fat molecules that can cross into the brain. So there's something called the blood-brain barrier. I don't know how much science we want to get into, but it essentially, keeps the brain pure from all the things circulating in the blood. It keeps it protected, essentially. And you can't get big, long-chain fatty acids into the brain for use as fuel, but you can bring ketones into the brain very easily for fuel. So essentially, our liver's making fuel for the brain in the form of these ketones. When we haven't eaten in a while, we will make them, or if we're burning fat for fuel almost exclusively without having carbohydrates in our diet.
And that produces what in the brain? Someone doing this will feel...
So what happens? So there's lots of mechanisms by which ketones improve brain health, but I'm just going to focus on two to start, and we can get into more if we want. But the first one is that it's an additional source of fuel for the brain cells. So most brain cells, neurons and the other brain cells, but we'll focus on neurons. They're the ones that are doing the real work. They're the ones that are, making the thoughts and the feelings and movements and everything, So neurons are burning glucose generally, normal metabolism. But what happens is the neurons become insulin resistant. And we know by research that all the mental health disorders have brain insulin resistance as part of the mechanism. And so when the neurons are insulin resistant, they can't get the glucose into the cells to burn as fuel. So there could be glucose, all around. Someone could have just had, a big bagel and there's glucose everywhere, but the neurons can't get it in to burn as fuel. So they're, literally bathed in glucose, but starving for energy.
And that causes, like, just in a very basic term, like low energy.
Well, it causes malfunction in the neuron. So what we don't really know. And sometimes it can make the cell it has too low of energy, so it can make it, hypo functional, like low energy, or it can make it get hyper excitable also if it has too low energies. It's just going to not function optimally. It could go either direction. But ketones come in and they don't need insulin to get into the neuron. So they just go right in, and there's a great source of fuel for the neuron, and it bypasses that blockade of insulin resistance. So that's a really important mechanism. And for some people, they'll feel benefits from just getting, like the first day their ketones go up, they'll say, whoa, I feel different. Or they'll take an exogenous ketone, like you said, and their ketones will go up, and they'll say, whoa, I really feel something different. Like my brain feels clearer, more focused. And that's that additional source of fuel coming in for an insulin-resistant brain, essentially.
So can we go there for a second?
Yeah.
I'm laughing because I had... Okay, I'll share this. I take this brand. It's called Ketones IQ. They're great. I mean, like I met their founder.
Yeah.
A lot of endurance athletes are taking it. I don't know if it's placebo or not, but like I ran the London Marathon last weekend, took ketones before. I have some feeling of euphoria. I remember, though, they sent me a package one point, and there was a bottle, and it had 10 doses in it.
Yeah.
And I thought it was a drink.
Oh, so you took all 10.
I took like 8 of the doses, and I felt like what happened to me? I mean, I felt
Your ketones were really high.
yes,
Yeah.
I was not well. I mean, I was like, oh,
Yeah.
I mean, like
What
Yeah,
did
that
you feel
would-
like?
it was not good. I did not feel good. Can you overdose on ketones? Is that
Yes. I mean, so in therapeutic ketosis, we do measure people's levels. So it's also very different than most psychiatry,
Yeah.
where I'm prescribing something. I can't check a meaningful blood level on most of the medications I prescribe. With this, I'm checking ketones. I want people to measure them every day. And I know that if I can get their ketone level above 0.5, that's considered therapeutic ketosis. For more severe conditions, I really want to get their ketones higher than that, more like 1.5 or 2 and above for weeks or months on end before they're really going to start to feel all the benefits. So yeah, I mean, it's...
But how does that, just relating back to Marathon Man here, because, you know, you will load up
Yeah.
on carbs, right?
Well, that's what's the interact? Like, can you manufacture ketosis?
But how does it relate to if you're spending the whole day, you know, eating pasta and donuts and whatever,
so,
you know?
So you're not. So if you're spending all day eating carbs, you're not going to naturally make ketones unless you go out and exercise long enough. Like when you run a marathon, you're going to make some ketones towards the end of that, unless you're, you know, eating carbs the whole time you're
Right.
running. Some people do that. You know,
Yeah.
you'll just carb up every hour, you know, a
Yep.
certain amount. So you know, but exercise creates ketones as well. So if someone's metabolically healthy, they run out of their glycogen storage in their muscles and they're not eating more carbs, they'll start burning fat for fuel and they'll start making some ketones. And but it's not the same as being in medical ketosis, therapeutic ketosis from the diet, because the difference there is that the ketone levels are high all day long, 24/7. And so that gets us to our next mechanism, which is that these ketones are a signaling molecule. They're not just this additional source of fuel, but they're a signal to the cell to improve mitochondrial health. And mitochondria are, you know, incredibly important for health.
The powerhouse?
It's the powerhouse.
Only
as
thing
you
I
said.
remember from
that's what most
7th
people
grade
remember.
biology.
And that's really important. Even if that was all they did, they're super important because they're the one making all that ATP. They are producing ATP from either the glucose or the fats. And so they're the energy factory. They're making all this energy. We need that. That's super important. But they're doing so much more than that. They're involved in, they huddle around the end of a neuron when they're about to release neurotransmitters. They seem to be involved in signaling neurotransmitter release. They're involved in the production of hormones. They're involved in the immune system, inflammation, and the resolution of inflammation. So mitochondria doing all these things, they have this intelligence. We're in a symbiotic relationship. Mitochondria used to be bacteria that a cell, you know, engulfed essentially, and then has become this part of our cells. We could not exist without mitochondria. And so energy factory for sure. And so we're now going to make more of these mitochondria and take apart the ones that aren't functioning. These old non-functioning mitochondria get broken down and the parts get used to rebuild new, better functioning mitochondria. This is called mitophagy. It's part, again, related back to this whole longevity world where people talk about autophagy, which is this idea of cellular recycling. Well, we do that with mitochondria and we call it mitophagy. But ketones signal our cells to do that and to make more mitochondria, called mitochondrial biogenesis.
So I want to get to the root of your work.
Yeah.
Because you started at, because I don't want to miss the main thing here.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
which is, you started the episode and you said we're in a mental health crisis and
Yeah.
we are in a
Metabolic health crisis.
metabolic health crisis.
Yes.
Jay, then about halfway through this conversation, brought up the idea that what is this line that we kind of walk in terms of, you know, being a patient in America and struggling with mental health and not having access to care. My mind actually goes to, this might be a wide-ranging solution for mental health, because what will happen with me is I will get a lot of direct messages on social media of people that are struggling with their mental health.
Yeah.
And there typically isn't something that I can hand them.
Right.
You know, it goes into, okay, what's going on? Let's do an assessment. Do you need therapy? Do you need treatment? Now, what I really want to say is, are you drinking water? Are
Yeah.
you fueling? Are you
Right.
getting outside? Are you like connecting with other people? And how are you fueling? So I say all that to say, at what point can I start telling those people, like, have you ever done a ketogenic diet. Like, have you ever, this might sound crazy,
Right.
but something you have access to, and everyone has access, is to do this diet. And then I also want to hear what you're doing specifically at Accord, because I'm sure it's not just, there is some other therapies and things that you're instilling into your patients there.
Yeah. I mean, I'm glad you're bringing this up, because on the one hand, this is an incredibly empowering thing for people to know that they can take control over their health, their mental health, and their metabolic health, their physical health, through their lifestyle. It is possible. People do it all the time. They say, all right, I know I'm metabolically unhealthy. I'm going to, start this program. I'm going to do low carb and fasting, and I'm going to turn it around. And you see, people are writing their comments about their own story on internet, posts or on YouTube posts all the time. I've lost 80 pounds. I've never felt better. I now exercise. I never could before. So it's incredibly empowering. The part that's a little tricky is that if you're using a ketogenic diet for mental health, it's a little bit specialized in that, it's not quite the same thing as just, eating low carb and exercising for overall health. But what I would say is that anyone can do those things. Anyone can, reduce their carbohydrates, get rid of ultra processed foods, eat a whole foods diet, exercise, work on their sleep, work on their mindfulness, and get tremendous overall benefits. I just don't want to say that, anyone can treat themselves for a mental health, disorder.
Correct.
Which, I can't say that.
Right.
But it is empowering. And then, for the people that I've worked with in my private practice and at Accord, people feel very empowered. They're like, now I have much more control over how this is going to go. I can eat the right things and do my exercise and follow this plan and feel amazing. And I don't need to rely on someone else to fix me in the same way. So I love that about this, in that it takes it out of the hands of only the professionals can fix people.
Well, I just think about the human experience, right? I mean, and I'll be honest, if there was one area of my life 13 and a half years into my sobriety that I fail pretty miserably on a daily basis, it's my diet.
Yeah.
And it's because I have no guideline. I mean, I woke up this morning, I ate this, meal that I got at the gym last night, and then I met someone for coffee, and there was a donut that looked good. And then on the way out, I grabbed a baguette with a ham and cheese and it's 11 o'clock in the morning, right. And I'm just, and so.
He doesn't eat fruit. Zac doesn't eat. But do you think because you run so much, you exercise so much, that you give yourself an excuse to go out on your diet?
I don't go wild. I mean, I also will starve myself for 12 hours as an entrepreneur and a CEO. Right. I will wake up at 7 and it'll be 7 o'clock at night and I'll be talking to a friend and be like, I haven't eaten a bite of food today.
Right.
And so the feeling of taking this power back from, it's speaking to me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the lesson is that food really matters. What you put in your body really matters. Even if you're doing all the other things right, you can become metabolically unhealthy by eating the wrong things. There's a great story. There's a company.
But what does that mean, though? Does that mean?
Let me tell you the story.
Okay.
I think it illustrates the point. So there's this founder of this company called VertaHealth. They're now like a $2 billion company. They reverse type 2 diabetes.
Wow.
And this is a guy who was like a serial entrepreneur. Before he founded this company, he was in between, companies, and he was running triathlons. And he was fueling up with these gels, these straight sugar essentially. And so he won, some, triathlon in his age category, super competitor. And at the same time, he was getting diagnosed with prediabetes. Meaning he was really metabolically unhealthy. And so he, goes to, some expert doctor and says, how can this be? I'm training all the time. I'm super fit. I'm doing the best I've ever done. And they looked at it and said, oh, it's all that sugar you're eating. You're eating a bunch of sugar while you're training. And so you're not getting all the benefits of the exercise because you're eating so much sugar. And people overdo it. You only need to fuel up with about 10 grams of sugar per hour of exercise, and people are taking in 4 or 5 times that amount. And so all that excess is not good for the metabolic health of cells. So that's what I mean to say that you can be doing all the right things and still get type 2 diabetes, but you're not really doing all the right things because you're eating all this sugar, essentially. And that inspired him to be part of this company that has now, like I said, reverses type 2 diabetes and almost anyone that comes through their doors. And it's an online company. Everyone should know about it. This should be on the front page of the newspapers. Type 2 diabetes is completely reversible. And do people with type 2 diabetes know that? No.
So like, but is part of you and your career and where you are in this moment in time, like you're putting this flag in the ground and saying a little bit of like, we got to go back to the basics?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, my mind was blown, by this experience with my kids. And now I can't unsee what I see, which is that we're not doing health right here. And it's all about prevention. I mean, really, in the end, we wouldn't have this metabolic health crisis and mental health crisis if people weren't eating the way that they're eating. Our food pyramid is really not serving us. We've had this metabolic crisis brewing since 1980 when the food pyramid first came out. And it's teaching us to eat, most of our calories from carbohydrates, which is really not good for us.
And what do you trace that back to? Fast food, companies, processed foods, just a cheaper, easier way to eat your meals and get your food.
Yeah, it is. It's very good for the food companies. They make much more profit on, a box of cereal. That's, when they ultra process food, they take, cheap grains and turn it into I don't even know how much cereal costs these days because I haven't bought a box of cereal in many years, but whatever, your $8 box of cereal or whatever. And that's almost all profit. No one makes that kind of profit on meat and eggs and fish and broccoli, right? So, when they process the food, that's where all the profit comes in. And that's, 90% of the grocery stores, those interior shelves that are, shelf-stable food. We're even generous to call it food, some of it. It's not really food.
Yeah.
So so you want to go? What happened? So can we, let's go back to your kids first.
Yeah.
Well, then I am going to go because I'm going to do this. There's like kind of three things that I want to close the loop on here.
Yeah.
And because I want,
got a lot of loop closing
I'm
to do.
so inspired by this conversation, and it is so aligned with the way I kind of think about it in the addiction recovery space. Is there are a lot of new methods coming online.
Yeah.
And I'm not to say those things don't work, but there are traditional methods, AA being one of them,
right,
from the 1930s that
right,
is proven to work.
Right.
And that's not rooted in it has to be AA, but it is rooted in like community for someone who is alone.
Yes.
Is very important, right? So like a good diet
community
for someone that has a bad diet is probably really important. So I digress on that, but one, I'm going to throw three questions at you. You can answer them in any order that you want. One is your colleagues. What are the holes they are poking in this, and how are you responding to that? Because I know I have brought you up in conversations too, and I've sent your information to people because I was, as I mentioned, like I was very inspired by that conversation. Two, I want the update on your children.
Yeah.
And then three, just the assessment and how you're treating people at a core, like really fundamentally, so people can hear that, because I think it's important.
Sure. So in terms of colleagues, so the state,
and I can remind you if you lose track.
The state of the evidence in ketogenic diets and mental health is that we have right now large case series. They're incredibly impressive. So like a case series of 31 inpatients in an inpatient unit in France with schizophrenia and bipolar and major depression. Case series that came out of Stanford, people with bipolar disorder and major depression. We have case series or a pilot study in University of Edinburgh, but these are not yet randomized controlled trials. And so in medicine, we have, sort of fetishized the randomized controlled trial in a way that it's not that that's not important. Randomized controlled trials are very important, but it's only one type of evidence. And there's certain things that don't, are not amenable to randomized controlled trials in the same way. All these lifestyle things, for example, like diet and exercise, it's very hard to do a randomized controlled trial on those things. It's very easy to do a randomized controlled trial on a pill. Mm-hmm. And so, medicine has now come to this level of saying, we only care about randomized controlled trials, which means we're getting rid of anything that doesn't do well in a randomized controlled trial. which is really problematic because it sort of excludes these other things that are really important and really powerful, that are harder to study in a simple randomized controlled trial design. And so a lot of my colleagues are sort of saying, well, there's no randomized controlled trials, which I get. There are randomized trials happening right now in ketogenic diets for mental health. So we will get some of that data in the next couple of years, which I'm very excited about. And so some of that argument will go away. However, I think there's a bigger issue, which is that doctors, I was this way until my mind was blown. Doctors want to do things that only doctors can do. And prescribing a diet or a nutritional plan or an exercise program or a mindfulness program or circadian rhythm program is not something that doctors really feel comfortable doing, most of them, because you didn't have to learn all of that in medical school. And you're not, to be honest, it's like, you're in a privileged position. You can write a prescription as a doctor. No one else can, or, only, PAs and nurse practitioners and doctors can in our country, right? And so they like to do things that only they can do. I was the same way. So I understand the mindset. And we didn't learn nutrition in medical school either. So it's also this whole thing that they would have to learn that's different from what they've learned and what they were taught in medical school. And if it wasn't taught in medical school, how important could it be anyway? So there's a lot of that. And I think that's going to be the main response from the psychiatric and mental health community for the foreseeable future. Until we get some of these more randomized trials coming out. But the fascinating thing is that there's a huge grassroots movement going on metabolic treatments in mental health. The families, the individuals are totally absorbed by this, to use a bad pun. They're sort of, eating it up. There's these, videos on YouTube and, podcasts that people are going on and books that have come out. Chris Palmer and Dr. Georgia Ede both have these great books about metabolic psychiatry, and people are gravitating towards this because they're not getting help.
Right.
They're not getting enough help. And this is something that makes sense. It's intuitive, and it's doable. And the stories and the case series and these pilot studies are dramatic, how much people are getting better. It's like your jaw hits the floor when you hear these things. People go from being on 5 medications and not feeling well and not doing well to, after a year or 2 on ketogenic diets, some of them are on no medications and thriving and never felt better. And it's as if they're in complete remission from a severe mental health disorder like bipolar disorder or schizoaffective disorder or severe depression or OCD. And I can't do that with medications.
Right.
I can't make people in remission in that way and functioning in that way. And so, so the tide will turn. I don't know how long it will take.
We have to believe what our eyes are telling us.
Exactly.
That's
right. And it's so low risk too. So, that's, the argument that sometimes doctors make is, well, there's not enough evidence, but you don't need a solid of evidence to do an intervention that has such little risk. Everything's a risk benefit calculation in medicine. In life, maybe you could say too, right? But, if the risks are very low and the benefits are potentially very high, that seems to be, to me, a no-brainer. And I think a lot of people out there agree with me, maybe not all my colleagues, but a lot of people who are suffering from this or families that are, dealing with this agree that this is really worth trying.
Yeah. Is it not just necessary, because you say metabolic psychiatry, you don't say keto psychiatry.
Right.
So
yes. So, the term metabolic psychiatry is, just one term that people use for all of this. It was coined by one of the researchers at Stanford who published that pilot trial. Shivani Sethi came up with that term. I think it's a nice term because it does link together this idea of metabolism and psychiatry. Some people don't like the term because it includes psychiatry in it, which is so infused with this idea of, using medications and other treatments. And so you could say metabolism for mental health or ketogenic metabolic therapy. There's lots of different terms people can use.
But keto is at the center of it.
Keto's really important. It's the most powerful way to really change metabolism. And so it's really, for someone who has a more severe condition, and addiction I include as definitely part of this as well. There's actually some data about addiction that I can talk about. Ketogenic diet is really an important part of the program. It's sort of the centerpiece of the program. And then we add on things. So this sort of gets to what we do at Accord. We do this very thorough lab evaluation. We put them on an individualized ketogenic diet from our dietitian, and our chef is making that food for them, and it's delicious, so people don't miss what they were, having before, and they don't feel cravings and withdrawals and stuff as much because they're eating this really delicious food. But then we get them exercising as well, walking after each meal, getting them in the gym and doing some resistance training. We get them doing mindfulness, which is really important as part of metabolic health, actually.
Why?
Because, so what we see, we have continuous glucose monitors on people, and what we will...
They wear them the whole time?
Yeah.
Would you, should everybody wear one?
I think everyone should wear a continuous glucose monitor for 2 weeks and see what's going on with their blood glucose. It's incredibly, insightful into what's going on in your metabolism. Because you realize that you went and had that, you just happened to grab that donut and your blood sugar just went to 210, and your blood sugar should never be 210.
I'm terrified.
But maybe it wouldn't. I mean, if you worked out as well that morning, you might not. I mean, it depends on, if you have enough muscle, you have a buffer against some poor diet,
No, I know.
Yeah.
There's a reason, there's mornings when I feel hungover after I eat like crap.
Yeah. Absolutely can. Yeah.
So they're there.
So let me
But
just say a
who
little
is
bit
there?
more about the mindfulness and the CGMs.
Yeah.
So they're wearing CGMs. They're eating almost no carbohydrates or low amounts of carbohydrates. And all of a sudden their blood sugar is spiking, and they'll come to us and say, my glucose is 150. What is going on? And usually on a ketogenic diet, it's, hanging out in the 80 to 95 range, maybe down to 70. It never goes above 95, if you're eating a ketogenic diet, unless you're stressed. And all of a sudden you get ramped up, you're stressed, you're making adrenaline and you're making cortisol, and your body thinks it's got to run away. Well, what does your body do when it thinks it's got to run away? It's our primitive responses. It's going to release a bunch of glucose to say, well, if you need to run from a threat, you need some fuel. So we're going to, pump out the glucose. Your liver will and muscles will just start, releasing it essentially. And so we'll see that, that happen. And then we'll say, all right, take some breaths, get grounded, do a mindfulness exercise. Glucose goes right back down to 90. So, we demonstrate that to people, how important. And for some people, they could do the diet and the exercise and get good sleep. If they're not doing the mindfulness thing and they're not managing their stress, they're not going to get the same benefits. They're not going to make ketones in the same way. Because also when their blood sugar goes up, their cortisol's up, they're not going to make ketones during that time either.
And it's 30 day, is it, what's?
So minimum of 30 days. Some people stay a second month or a third month because we have a huge emphasis on teaching people everything they need to know so that they can keep going with this in their regular lives indefinitely. That's the idea. It's not just you go and you do this and you feel good and you go back to your regular lifestyle. This is meant to be a permanent change in lifestyle. And some people need more time to learn all that stuff, and how are they going to apply it at home, essentially.
And if you break ketosis, if you break it, is that a relapse? Is that what?
No.
I imagine there's some stuff around diet culture with all this too, and eating disorders. Obviously, we see a lot of in our work, and I think of my sister who's been very vocal about her struggles and has it in a good place. But to your point earlier, we have to eat. Yeah,
we have to eat. The eating disorder community is actually the most resistant to this in the whole mental health community, because they say, especially for anorexia, the mantra has always been, all food is good. You're saying there's some foods that they shouldn't eat, and you can't do that. And that's a big problem. Well, it turns out that the ketogenic diet happens to be, looking to be very effective for anorexia nervosa, which is one of the most severe and deadly of all the psychiatric conditions that exist. I mean, people die from anorexia at the highest rate of, I think, all psychiatric diagnoses. It's really lethal. It's really bad, and it's very hard to treat. We don't have any good medications for it, and the psychotherapies for it are, not all that effective most of the time. People go to program after program after program, and they never get out of it. I've taken care of many people in my career who are chronically anorexic like that. So there was a case series of 6 people with anorexia that were put into remission with a combination of ketogenic diet and ketamine infusions that was done. And now there's 2 big trials going on at University of California, San Diego, where I know the investigator who's doing these trials on teens and adolescents with anorexia, and he's seeing incredible results with the ketogenic diet.
Amazing.
But how do you, well, first question, who can go to a cord? Anyone with a metabolic syndrome, or just anyone who's like, I need to change, my relationship to what I eat or how I...
We're pretty open. I mean, we generally say, we want people to come who have some mental health
Pretty
situation.
severe, right? I mean, pretty severe.
We have been mostly getting people who have severe conditions. So, we've taken care of people with schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, lots of people with bipolar disorder, major depression, OCD, lots of people with comorbid trauma, comorbid addictions. So, we've been doing all of that. But, our criteria...
Do you consider it like a last house on the block? Is that how people are viewing it?
What do you mean? Like,
someone who's been in mental health treatment 10 times shows up at your doorstep and says, I'm willing to try anything.
There is some people where that's the case. Some people where it's just, they've been now in the system for a few years and they're not getting anywhere.
Right.
Things are getting worse, in fact, with all the medications and treatments, and they're spending lots of money, some of them are, and they're getting nowhere. They're not getting any better. I mean, or they're stabilized enough, but, they're not needing to be in a hospital anymore, but they're not really living life. That's so common with these disorders, right? People get on a bunch of medications. And I still prescribe medications. I mean, I'm a big believer. Medications save lives. I used to work on an inpatient unit where I've saved many lives with medications and even things like ECT. So yes, people need to get put on these medications. They have a first break of a psychosis or a manic episode or a severe depression. They need something to get them out of that. And before they could even entertain something like a cord. But then they get stuck. They're on these meds. They're not needing to be hospitalized, but they also can't get back to work. They can't get back to their regular social community. They're not back in their roles in life. And they're just living a life as a patient. And there's so many people like that. And I think this is a great option for people like that because they can turn things around over time. And then eventually they may be able to reduce their medications slowly under a doctor's care. I never recommend people take themselves off of their medications.
Amazing.
What's the barrier for entry? Like, does insurance cover this?
No,
or?
so it is a private pay program. I mean, insurance doesn't even, can you believe this? Insurance doesn't even cover a visit with a dietitian for someone with a mental health disorder.
Yeah.
You have to have diabetes or pre-diabetes to even have
gonna
insurance
have to blaze
cover.
A trail.
Yeah.
You're going to have to blaze a trail.
This is definitely new, and we're the only place that's doing anything quite like this.
It's a great question.
So yes, it is a private pay program, but we do have some scholarship money available. So, if someone really thinks this is the right thing for them and they don't have the ability to pay for the full fee, we can work with people.
Well, I mean, look, if we're being realistic about it, anything in early medicine is expensive.
Yes.
And the hope is that you are going to do it and do it in a way where people start paying attention, which I think they will. And then we will learn to produce this and manufacture it and roll this treatment out in bigger ways where insurance and other things cover it. So I appreciate your, carrying the sword, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, we need to do more research. And then, as you said, there's ways to scale this up to make it much less expensive.
Right.
There can be a little, program in someone's community where they can show up after work, cook dinner, learn the cooking, learn the diet. While they're cooking, they can learn all about it and then start applying it in their life. And, for, 3 or like an IOP kind of model kind of thing could absolutely be, transformative. And, in the end, it will save insurance companies money because we're making people metabolically healthy. They're no longer going to have prediabetes. They're no longer going to have, fatty liver and all of these things that are going to, ultimately cost the insurance companies lots of money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a couple things because this is...
a
couple things here. Number one.
Because we got to get the kid up.
Yeah, we're going to end with the kids. Yeah, we're going to end with the kids. But a couple things. You have children.
Yeah.
Someone has children.
Yeah.
What is a healthy diet for kids?
Yeah.
Because obviously you're not going to monitor them on the ketosis and be measuring.
Of course
What
not.
is a healthy diet for kids today?
So the most important thing to think about as a parent who's got kids is think about how much ultra processed food they're eating. You can't avoid it. But is it 80, 90% of their calories, or is it more like 20% of their calories? Huge difference. So that would be the thing that I would focus on as a parent. And ultra processed foods are things that have, generally like 5 ingredients on the label or more, and lots of things that you can't pronounce. So, all these chemicals in the foods, the things that can sit on a shelf for 3 years and still be considered, edible, has to have a bunch of chemicals in it. And so if you can get that percentage of ultra processed foods down much lower, really important. And then, try to avoid sugar all the time. Soda is just not necessary. And so that's where I would start for parents, and keep kids moving. There's so much now of kids getting stuck in front of screens and not getting outside and not moving their bodies, unless they're like on the athlete track, in which case they're probably exercising too much for their bodies as kids, right? So we have this bipolar way of dealing with this. Instead, everyone should just be getting out and getting some exercise.
Okay. Second thing, a young person who is struggling with substances, whether that's alcohol or cocaine or heroin, something, they have a problem and they come to you.
Yeah.
How would you treat them?
Yeah. So, are they willing to do this?
They're in your office and they're willing. They're listening to you.
They're willing. Okay. Yeah. I would say, look, like we need to, detoxify your body. Are they going to go through withdrawal? I need to, manage that question, number one. If not, if it's something where they're not going to go through withdrawal, it's same things. Let's start small let's try a whole foods, get the ultra processed foods out of the diet, start moving your body, start doing a bit of mindfulness, start small, and see if they can, with all the other supports that they might need to reduce their use, or hopefully stop their use of that substance. But ultimately, we've got to get them metabolically healthier, and eventually it may be that, they may want to do a ketogenic diet to really get them to the point where they can do this.
But I know maybe you don't want to say this, but like in yourself, what you believe, if someone walks into your office, are you thinking, if you do what I say, you will not need any assisted medication treatment, you will be separated from the drugs and the alcohol. You will live a healthy life, and you will not need anything other than what I'm telling you to do.
I do believe that if someone, is willing to do all of it, like come to a court and get completely immersed in it, they're willing to put their substance aside, come in and really do the program, we can do that. I really do.
Wow. I love that.
I think it's that powerful. Anyone who actually does the program, the results are mind-blowing.
It's like anything in life.
Yeah.
If I go to the gym and I'm prescribed a workout, and I pick,
you're going to build muscle.
But if on the other hand, if I pick bits and pieces of it, it's probably not going to be as effective.
That's right. No, it's exactly the same thing as you said. It's like, your trainer tells you to lift this way, eat these things. If you do that, you're going to build the muscle that you want to build. That's it. But the hard part is doing it. Like, can you get yourself to do it? That's the challenge. That's why we made the program this immersive program where there's supportive staff around and all these other people there. And it's easier to do hard things in a group of people who are also doing hard things with you. Yeah. And so that's that attitude and mindset that we sort of develop within the community there of, we're all doing this hard thing and we are feeling better and we're enjoying it and we don't want to go back. That's sort of the attitude.
Okay. Yeah. My last thing, I did want to go into longevity, but I will put that to the side.
I'm just running like I am such a stickler for time, and we have a staff meeting that I'm now 2 minutes late for.
So, but I have to, I have to flip it on its head.
My anxiety, I need, is coming up.
I'm sorry. I have
it's all good.
But anxiety is the word, because I have to flip it on its head for a second. You started mental health epidemic, mental health crisis, young people. What is the balance or the risk? Because there are people who, this idea of prevalence inflation, we talk so much about this stuff that we start to believe it is real or happening in our life. So more younger people are anxious, more younger people are depressed. Therapy is at the same time greatly encouraged and more people are seeking therapy. Like, is there a risk of manifesting the problem because we're so aware of analyzing a potential problem?
I mean, I think I understand what you're asking. Because we keep talking about a mental health crisis, are we creating a mental health crisis? I don't think so. I mean, not from where I sit. And I think, the statistics agree with me that there truly is more problems with mental health. There truly is more autism. It's not that we just changed the diagnostic criteria. There truly is more, teens with anxiety. There truly is more teen suicide. So I don't think we create that by talking about it. I think we're talking about it because it's happening and we don't know what to do about it. And what we think we are doing to help people isn't helping people enough. And I think this is the missing piece in that, the metabolism of our country is getting worse and worse and worse. And we're continuing to eat in these ways and, look at screens all night and not get good quality sleep and all these things that, sound unpopular to get people to try to change, but they truly are affecting our biology, and our biology is where, the root of our mental health.
Yeah. Amen, brother.
All right. What's the update?
So my older one, the one who was 14 at the time, he was actually more ill than the younger one. I mean, he was so severe. He couldn't get out of bed for a couple of years. Wow. He was an athlete. He was a soccer player. He used to play soccer 6 days a week. I mean, it was just tragic to see him so ill. He couldn't think. He couldn't go to school. He was out of school for 2 years. Wow. He missed 2 years of school. He's now back in college and studying pre-med, and goes to the gym. He's a healthy kid, has friends. He's doing great. Yeah. And not that this didn't affect him. He is. This will. I think probably.
Are you getting emotional? Is this? Yeah.
I know it's very emotional. I mean, we went through so much. And he's so proud of him. Yeah. It makes me tear up.
That's so beautiful.
Unfortunately, my younger one, he was not quite as affected. He was getting better, and actually he was about 90% recovered. And he was in school during the pandemic, that when they forced everyone to go back to school, and he was very worried about that. It was when that Omicron wave was happening. I think it was 2021, early 21, and he got that. And either he has, relapse from some version of long COVID, or it's that plus a combination of just the trauma of getting ill again after he had done all that work to recover and then got set back, and the fear that, all that work can just be taken away from him from just getting exposed to the wrong virus. And so he's really, unfortunately, pretty stuck again right now. And of course, because his dad is so into this stuff, he's not going to do it. He's 20 years old now. 20. So he's not going to do, what I'm.
Is he in college or?
No, he's really stuck. He's just, he's at home, and he's, in a extended sort of gap year kind of thing. Yeah. So it's really sad. Yeah. And, but we're there, and, he's still, mentally, cognitively sharp. And, at some point he's going to decide that he wants to try again, and I've got all kinds of ideas, believe me, for what he can try.
Well, your honesty and emotion is so real and raw, and I do not regret my decision to have you in and to have this conversation, because I think that you just hit on so many things that I've been thinking about: the processed foods, the screen time, the way that we treat our bodies, the way that we sleep, the way that we wake up. All those things are so important. And so I'm grateful for you. How do people find you?
So I'm not big on social media. I do have a LinkedIn account, so people can always find me there. And if they send me a personal message, I always respond. And then they can find Accord we have a website called accordmh.com. So, people can find us there, and we have all kinds of resources and blogs, and there's a video of me doing an academic lecture about all this stuff, talking about all the data, and, I'm, trying to get the word out in every possible way that I can, because I really do think that so many people can benefit from this, and people don't know about it. And so I just want everyone to hear that this is an option for them.
It's so beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, you feel like Matt more than Dr. Bernstein now. I appreciate you sharing, so much. And
thank you.
I know Jay probably wants to talk to you for another 3 hours.
Well, maybe we'll do a part 2 at a later point in time.
Yeah. We're excited to see where this journey takes you. Thanks for coming.
My pleasure.
Yeah,
thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Yeah.